there are multiple people online at my house.
I understand.
Too many things going on.
Yes, we are just getting set up to actually have a camera for this, so I don't have to use my phone anymore. So.
Oh, that's nice. Wow, I can't believe you've been doing it with your camera. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, I do. I use my phone as the camera and the microphone, and then I use my computer for everything else. So I've been kind of dually going back and forth. I think it makes my audience nuts, but.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate
it. Absolutely. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Actually, one of my interns took your course, Morgan Stutler.
The name is familiar.
And she recommended you, so I was like, I absolutely want to hear it. So
nice, thank you.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, she graduated in May. Actually, a year ago May, and so she's been and she's actually back volunteering for me now. So
that's nice. Very good. So how are things at the museum?
Oh, they're really good. We've been open since May, so we've been trying to, well, everything but our buildings. Our historic buildings aren't open, but the grounds are open and all of our trails, so everybody can go through the wildlife trail, nature trail, and visit the animals. And
so do you have a reduced capacity that you're allowed to have in?
We do. It's 30% of our most capacity, which is like 3,000. So it really ends up being about, I think, I can't remember what that is. It's like 300 people or something. That's 10%, but it ends up being about 300 people. So it's not.
That's not terrible. I mean, it's probably you would like to have more, but.
But we're never at 300 people at any one time. So we haven't reached that yet anyway. So we haven't had that problem.
Well, I'm definitely have to bring my kids out because we haven't been in a few years and they love it there. So
it's been nice since, there's been really nowhere to go outside with the parks closed, but with everything finally opening back up, it's
good to get outside.
Great to get outside.
And it's kind of cooling off just a little bit, which is nice.
Yes, finally this week. So
great. Okay, let's see.
We've got a few minutes, so
I'll make sure I have my PowerPoints up.
I should have shared with you, I think.
Last week I was in class, and I've done Zoom meetings since this all started. Last week I was in class, and I was sharing what I thought. I was sharing slides with my students because it looked like it on my screen. And after I did this whole 15-minute spiel, one of the students was like, we can only see your email. For 15 minutes, you couldn't be like, excuse me, we have no idea what you're talking about. It's like, okay, I don't know why, because that's not what I see on my screen, but whatever. So you can see my slides, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
And our audience is very good about chiming in our chat room.
Cool. How many people do you generally get?
Usually between 40 and 50.
Wow.
So it's been nice. I mean, we don't get that many on site for lectures. So it's been really great to have this venue.
That is a good number of people.
I think we had 55 registered for tonight. Well, last I checked, that was a few hours ago, but
cool.
We'll give them a few more minutes to get logged in.
I apologize in advance if one or both of my children pop in or the dog starts barking or something. My husband is home, but he's also on a meeting right now. And they're on their iPads, but you never know what they will do.
No. I think we all understand that at this point.
It's just going to happen.
We've all gone through it. That's right. Yeah, we've been having camp all summer, so I've had missing campers or parents who haven't picked up campers, and
oh my gosh,
all kinds of things happen during this. So I've had to okay, everybody hang on, I've got to go find a camper. Or
wow, fun times.
Exactly. See here.
If I asked them to use the thumbs up emoticon, would we be able to see that? Would you see it?
We both should be able to see it. I can promote you if not.
Okay. I don't know where I see it at. I just put the, I see it probably just.
No.
I see it. If I put the, if I look at the attendees list, I'll be able to see it.
Okay, yes, you should.
I just have a quick opening question for them.
Okay.
I see one of my students is on. Good for her.
Because we've had a few students come on and be their participation in class that week for certain professors. So
I did not even think to do that.
Well, I do record it, and it does register how long the student stays on, or the attendee stays on. Not that they just showed up. It does register the amount of time they're on. So I can tell the professor, hey, they were only on for 5 minutes. But
I had no idea you could do that in Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know. I'll have to remember that when I'm on meetings.
Yes, you can see everybody who registers and everybody who attends and the length of the time they attend. And
neat. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Not that I'm spying on any of my attendees.
Yeah, a meeting I was in yesterday, they told me that there was something that they could do with the recording that they would know who was there because we had no way to take attendance.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, I'm recording it, so I'll just look at who was here later. And I was like, I didn't know you could do that. So
you can do, you can download it directly from Zoom. I always do it right after the meeting so that we know the numbers, and it creates a report for you, a spreadsheet report for you. So
cool.
Yes, we can say we had so many attendees for such and such lecture every week. It's nice for grants.
Yeah, that is great. You know, they love data. Everybody likes to see the data.
Mm-hmm.
Can they see us now?
Yes, they can see you. They may not be able to see me since you're screen sharing.
So I just look like I'm talking to myself.
That's okay. They might be able to see me. I don't know. Oh, Debbie says she sees us both. Say thank you, Debbie.
Thanks, Debbie. Excellent. Whoops. Can't put one on.
I guess I can only see you because I have my screen on something else. So
yeah, I can only see you as well. So
okay, well. Oh yes, at the top I can see us both. Okay. Okay, looks like it's 6 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lacey Ballinger, and I'm the Director of Collections and Exhibits at the Tallahassee Museum. And thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Tallahassee Museum's Museum Mixology lecture series that we host every week on Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the purpose of this series is to provide a unique happy hour educational experience, including cocktails and crime, sipping with science, and a toast to history. And this week we are hosting a toast to history with Dr. Tanya Peres. And I hope you've had a chance to stop by our partner, Madison Social, for a curbside to-go drink. But part of those proceeds do come back to the museum if you did. And if you didn't, we have a virtual tip jar, which I will post in the chat room, the link to that. If you are willing to contribute, we really greatly appreciate your generosity and loyalty to the museum. Because of you, we are able to advance the cultural and educational impact of our institution. And like I said, we are going to be talking with Dr. Tanya Peres. She is an associate professor of anthropology at Florida State with a specialization in I was practicing this word.
Zooarchaeology.
Zooarchaeology. Too many O's. Dr. Peres earned a PhD in anthropology from the University of Florida in 2001 and an MA and BA, both from Florida State, in anthropology. She's a registered professional archaeologist since 2001 and has nearly 2 decades of field and lab experience on academic and applied prehistoric and historic archaeological projects across the southeastern United States, Panama, Mexico, and Scotland. She is interested in the relationships between humans and their environments and humans and animals, especially in terms of subsistence and how animals were incorporated into the native worldview. She is the director of Middle Cumberland Archaeology Project and the Rutherford County Archaeology Research Program. I'm having trouble with the word archaeology tonight. As a zooarchaeologist, Dr. Peres collaborates on numerous projects with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as CRM firms. She has researched and published on zooarchaeological topics ranging from ancient and historic subsistence practices to the use of animal bone and teeth implements in indigenous tattooing traditions to the symbolic power, power of animals in native cosmologies, medicine, and spiritual practices. Every project directed by Dr. Peres includes a public outreach component via hands-on site and lab volunteer days, project blogs, social media, and a positive working relationship with university and local media outlets. Dr. Peres regularly presents on archaeology to local community groups, including the Boy Scout Merit Badge University, among numerous others. Most recently, Dr. Peres, as president of the Tennessee Council for Professional Archaeology, successfully led an effort at the state capitol to name a Tennessee state artifact in 2014 and to designate September as Tennessee Archaeology Awareness Month in 2015. Both of these very public acts of legislation are meant to encourage Tennesseans to learn more about and work to help preserve the state's varied and irreplaceable cultural history. So tonight, as I said, we're going to be listening and learning so much from Dr. Peres. I've heard so many great things about her. I can't wait to learn more about Foodways archaeology during the Spanish Colonial Period. And I will turn everything over to you and stop trying to say archaeology now.
Now I'm probably going to have issues with it. Well, thank you, Lacey, for inviting me tonight. Thank you so much for that really nice introduction. I feel like you did some research there to have all that information. And thanks to our attendees for taking time tonight to come listen to me talk about food. I would like to begin by acknowledging that my institution, Florida State University, and the city where I live and currently conduct my research, Tallahassee, is located on land that is ancestral and traditional territory of the Appalachian Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Miccosukee Tribe of Florida, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida. We pay respect to their elders and present and extend that respect to their descendants, to the generations yet unborn, and to all Indigenous people. Okay. If we were in person and I could see all of you, I can't see anything but myself, which is never really fun when you're given a talk. I would ask you all to raise your hand if you like food. But since we're on Zoom, you can raise the little thumbs up emoticon, or you raise your hand, yeah, if you like food. I like food. I'll give it 2 thumbs up. I like food so much that I like to think about it. I like to cook it. I like to grow it. Of course, I like to eat food. And I like to read and write about it, and have found over these past, however many years I've been doing this, that it is a topic with endless possibilities. And tonight, that is, of course, the topic of my talk. And I'll be sharing with you different ways archaeologists learn about food and foodways, and I'll explain what the difference is between those two. And I'm going to specifically focus in on the area local to Tallahassee and the people that lived here in the 17th century. Okay, so we can probably all agree on what food is. The plants and animals that we eat to stay alive. These are the things that fulfill the biological need for sustenance, I guess is the correct word. But for humans, food is so much more than that. Ask anybody with a toddler. You know that food is more than just what you should be eating. So the way we get our food, through hunting and gathering, through fishing, through foraging, or farming, that's what we would call a subsistence strategy. And an individual or a group of people may subscribe to a certain diet. So not diet really in the modern sense of the word, which usually means avoiding or restricting the consumption of certain foods or beverages to bring about some kind of change in your health, typically weight loss. Diet from a foodways perspective means the general types of food eaten by an individual or a group on a regular basis, like a Mediterranean diet, or vegetarian diet, or religious-based diet, which we'll talk about later. Because diets are general and include a set of foods, we can compare the diets between different cultural groups, such as comparing the diet of the Appalachians to that of the Spaniards. And so, in looking at this very kind of busy graphic in front of you, foodways includes all of those terms, right? So it includes food, it includes diet, it includes subsistence, it includes cuisine, which is, a type of diet that reflects local ingredients and cooking practices like French cuisine. It goes beyond the sum of all of these terms, right, to include all the activities, the rules, the context, the meanings that surround the production of food, the harvesting of it, processing of foodstuffs, cooking, serving, and of course, eating of those foods. But it also governs how we dispose of food trash, food waste. And typically foodways are culturally constructed behaviors, which then in turn lead to pattern behaviors that archaeologists can study under kind of the umbrella of foodways archaeology. So tonight, or this evening, I guess it's not really night yet, although it is definitely overcast at my house. This evening, we're going to focus on Appalachia Province, which is the area surrounding modern-day Tallahassee. And on this slide, you can see the shaded-in area right here. So Appalachia Province extends from the Osceola River to the Ocklawahamie River to the west. And during the time that the Appalachians lived here, they were known amongst other indigenous groups in the Southeast as being very powerful, very politically complex. They were Muskogean speakers. Their lineal ancestors built Lake Jackson Mounds, which is a major civic ceremonial site in the north part of Tallahassee, which some of you have probably visited. It's a state park. That was their capital in the pre-European contact period. The Appalachians lived here from at least as early as AD 1100, so almost 1,000 years ago, to 1700. Certainly they had ancestral ties to this area prior to AD 1100. And the Appalachians are very interesting because they lived here in this area that was kind of between two major cultural worlds. So they had ties to peoples to the north and to the east, which those people we consider to be, we call them kind of like the Mississippian period peoples of the Southeast or the Eastern Woodlands. And there was a shared kind of set of ceremonial trends, economic trends, and cultural trends across the Eastern Woodlands, with probably one of the defining features being a reliance on maize agriculture as part of their economy. People to the south, further south in the peninsula of Florida, didn't rely on maize agriculture as heavily, And for sure, if you get all the way down to Southwest Florida and the Calusa, which probably many of you have heard of the Calusa had nothing to do with maize agriculture. They were a very complex group of people that had other ways of making a living, and their economic success was built on fishing and shellfishing and intensively, I don't want to say farming, but intensively farming the marine and estuarine environments that they lived in. So the Appalachians were really kind of more oriented towards the north at that time, relying on intensive maize agriculture. At that time, they practiced more intensive and extensive agriculture than any other group in what we call Florida now at that time. So before Spanish contact, well, even before Spanish contact, and definitely before the Spanish mission period, which will be the focus of tonight, the Appalachians tended to live in villages that were spread across their province. This area is sometimes called the Tallahassee Red Hills, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, likely living in small family farmsteads, not congregated into large villages because they were farmers. So why would you want to congregate in big areas and then have to travel very far to your fields? You're going to live in and amongst your fields. There were villages, and there were concentrations of houses and families, but for the most part, the Appalachians were living across the countryside so that they could be very successful at intensive maize agriculture. So what we know about Appalachian foodways in the pre-mission and the mission periods is extremely limited. We know that they lived in an environment that was very good for farming, for hunting, fishing, and foraging. As the last slide showed you, it's the woodland area, the freshwater lakes, the streams, the rivers, the arable soils of the Red Hills, and of course, resources at the coast meant that the Appalachians were able to attain a very high standard of food security in the pre-mission period. And this level of success, of course, included that extensive agricultural economy that they did, but they also were very good hunters, and they had vast stores of dried deer meat. This is something that is noted in the DeSoto Chronicles, that the historic documents talk about the massive amounts of maize and dried deer meat. They also include some information about how black drink was made, and some of you may have heard of something called black drink. It's a tea made from the leaves of the yaupon holly, which is native to this area and actually grows all over Tallahassee today. The tea was drunk during ceremonial functions, and some people believe that the caffeine content was so strong in the black drink that if you drank enough of it, you would become, you would have hallucinations or you would vomit. But we know today that the caffeine content is really not that strong in the black drink, that it's really not stronger than a normal cup of coffee. The vomiting or purging and any kind of hallucinations that may or may not have happened likely resulted from a prescribed set of behaviors that went with the drinking of the black drink, behaviors that were necessary for cleansing, preparation, and atonement during annual ceremonies held by the Appalachians and other peoples in the eastern woodlands and even further to the west. So overall, there's very little narrative attention given to food and foodways of indigenous communities that were encountered by the Spanish, right? Because we're relying on these kind of Spanish chroniclers to give us this information. Archaeologists that work in the mission period rely very heavily on 16th century accounts from the Narvaez and the DeSoto chroniclers, amongst other translations of documents, a couple that I'll talk about towards the end of my talk. They're important insights, although we know we have to take them with a grain of salt because they're being written by people that have an agenda to either make out the indigenous communities as extremely savage and therefore worth conquering, or that everything was so amazing here in the New World that the Spanish were sure to succeed in their quest for gold, God, and glory. So that's something to remember when we use those documents and try to make interpretations based off of them. So, for instance, an example of, the mentions of food and foodways in the DeSoto Chronicles. DeSoto and his group were told by indigenous groups in peninsular Florida that Appalachia province was highly productive in terms of sustainable agriculture and growing their own foods. And historians think this was a major incentive for the Spaniards to come to Appalachia province for the winter. So when DeSoto and his group arrived early in the fall, they noted that there was an abundance of maize and beans and squash, or the three sisters, as we call them. And then, of course, other vegetables growing in fields ready to be harvested. In the village, they found great quantities of dried venison, again, dried deer meat. They were very excited for that, stored for the winter. And it was pretty clear that the Appalachians were more than capable of producing more food than what they needed immediately, and that caught the Spaniards' attention because that's what they were looking for, some way to provision. DeSoto needed some way to provision himself and the 500 troops that he brought with him, in addition to animals and all kinds of other accoutrements. So DeSoto and his group set up their winter camp in Appalachia province. We assume it to be at the capital, which is Anhaica, which is the western capital of Appalachia. This area is now under Myers Park in Tallahassee. It probably extended out much further than the Myers Park area. The picture here of the excavations at the Martin House, it's the Governor Martin House that some of you may have been to or been by. It's off of Lafayette Street. Is Anhaica, and it's often called the DeSoto site because the archaeologists were looking for evidence of DeSoto having been here in 1987. And so it has multiple names, but it was the western capital, and DeSoto did camp there. And you can see in the excavations there in the lower part of your screen, I have circled the 3 maize cob fragments that are burned. Those are things that we find on Appalachia sites of this time period. And those were found at Anhaica. Not a lot of work beyond that has been done at Anhaica or even in the Myers Park area. I actually live adjacent to the Myers Park neighborhood, and we don't see a lot of artifacts and stuff around here. So it may be that we're actually in the middle of agricultural fields and their houses are hard to come by. Other historic and ethnohistoric documents that have been translated and synthesized by the late historian John Hann. He was a historian for the Department of State and worked at Mission San Luis for many years. He noted in his translations that there was not really a lot of information about how Native people grew their food or harvested or processed it. And that is very likely because many of the activities that go into the food ways of the Appalachia were part of the daily life of women, which are all but absent from the historic chronicles, or at least the available translations of those chronicles, right? Because myself, I have to rely on others that are more fluent in 17th century Spanish historical documents than I am. So fortunately, there are some documents that make note of this, which I'm going to tell you about. The best source of information seems to come from observations made by Bishop Calderon, who was the Bishop of Cuba in the 1670s, and he came to tour La Florida, and he commented on a form of agriculture called slash and burn, or swidden agriculture. And this is an activity where, as you can see in the pictures, right, you set fire to burn off the weeds and the undesirable plants to promote soil fertility and growth of desirable crops. So this is an activity where both men and women participated. After the fields were cleared with fire, they were left for a few months before planting. This method is still in use today in many parts of the world. So it's not something that we can't witness today if we needed to. Bishop Calderon noted that this form of field preparation took place generally in January and was combined with a form of group hunting in which the the villagers would surround the area to be burned, and then kill or capture the deer and the ducks and the rabbits and other critters fleeing from the fire. So that observation right there gives us some information about how the Appalachians and likely other groups cleared areas to prepare them for planting, that they worked together communally in that activity, and also in the hunting that arose, the hunting opportunities that arose from that kind of burning of land to clear it. So one thing that I have found in my reading of these translations of the Spanish Chronicles is that foods that are being noticed and are being described in these documents fall into two categories. The first is a category that mentions food that seem exotic to the Spaniards. So examples of this might include the extensive fields of corn, beans, and squash. Also the caches of dried venison. Corn is mentioned frequently throughout documents. So it is something that they're not completely unfamiliar with, but definitely something that they are interested in and make notice of. Alonso de la Turanado mentioned a number of other sources of starch beyond maize utilized by natives. These plants, they're local or native plants called ache, zabaca, and panoco. And he notes that the indigenous peoples used 3 of them a great deal, even though, as he quotes, they have the regular wheat of the land, which is maize, end quote. So just this little simple observation shows us that maize was clearly an important staple in the native diet, but it was not the only thing that was being relied on. And this is in kind of stark contrast to the Europeans, who tended to rely heavily on cereals like wheat, barley, rye, and oats. So they're not putting all of their eggs into one basket, so to speak. The second category of foods that the Spanish noted in the Chronicles were ones that could be compared to foods from their homeland. And examples of this include comparing maize to wheat, which was done kind of often. Also comparing deer to sheep. There are mentions of the natives, loving the deer as much as Europeans love sheep, and they rely on them just as much, and that they often are found in large numbers like herds of sheep are. Let's see. Before Europeans arrived on the scene, the Appalachians and other groups in the eastern woodlands, and particularly here in the southeast, relied heavily on native fruits and vegetables. So things like native grapes, like muscadine grapes, hickory nuts, acorns, persimmons, plums, blackberries were all regularly harvested and used in feeding communities. After sustained contact with the Spanish, the Appalachians still used native fruits, but they also added other foods that were introduced to them by the Spanish. So things like wheat and barley, peas and chickpeas. Chickpeas are very important in Spanish diet. Sugarcane, figs, strawberries, sweet nuts, chestnuts, pomegranates, peaches, persimmons, and quinces, amongst other things, are all recorded in these historic documents. And some are even found archaeologically. In looking at archaeological evidence of foodways, archaeologists look at, of course, objects, artifacts, or things that we can hold in our hand. But we're also interested in these other things called features. And features are areas where some kind of activity took place. They're usually something that we look at or we can define based on soil color changes or soil texture changes, the inclusion of artifacts. When you've been doing archaeology for a while, features start to become something that's really easy to identify, at least that you're on one, not necessarily what it is, but they are something that we look for. So in this slide, you can see these are all the same types of features. They are they're called smudge pits, right? So they're little pits that are dug and packed with maize cobs that are then burned to create smoke. And they're called smudge pits because of the smoke that is created. And they can be used for things like hide smoking. And this picture is not from the Southeast, but this is just to give you an idea of what that might look like. You can see the little pit right here with a frame over it. The deer skin is stretched over the frame and then smoked to dry it out. Native groups in the Southeast were well known for the deer skins that they produced, and of course result in the deer skin trade in the later 17th and 18th century. So smudge pits in and of themselves are not foodstuffs, but there's a lot of evidence there of foodways. So you have the maize cobs, right? This right here is a burned maize cob, and you can see them all packed in really close up. So we know that they were growing and harvesting, and then after the kernels are removed, using the cobs for other things. We know they're hunting deer because they're then smoking and tanning the hide off that deer. Another type of feature, this is one of my favorite types of features, are used for cooking or for food waste disposal. So in this picture, you see hearths, trash pits, and earth ovens. We'll come back to the trash pits and the hearths in a little bit. Other types of data that we look at archaeologically for foodways evidence is plant remains. And so archaeobotany, or the longer word paleoethnobotany, is a specialty within archaeology that studies different types of plant remains, whether they're macro remains or micro remains, and they're all listed here on the screen for you, so I don't have to read them off. But archaeobotanical remains often, they're not very abundant typically, not in terms of when you compare them to things like ceramic sherds or lithics, but they are evidence for what plants were grown or harvested or gathered, how they may have been processed, roasted, steamed, cooked in an earth oven, dried, and had the kernels removed, etc., and then of course eaten.
Dr. Perez, Romus has a question for you about, among starches, is it known if the Appalachians ate cassava or manioc or patatas from the Caribbean?
I don't know of any evidence for that. So actually, one thing I'll say about plant remains is that the parts we're looking for that identify what plants were being used are typically the edible parts, right? Minus things like corn cobs or peach pits, or rinds from a squash or a watermelon. Typically, it is very difficult to get that level of information. And to my knowledge of all the reading I've done, I don't know of any evidence of manioc or cassava in this area. Good question though. I will say this, we can look at the working edges of tools like manos and metates or mortars and pestles to see if there's any evidence of micro remains, or if micro remains can be extracted from those areas where they might get stuck in little pits or grooves on the working edges of tools. And we would look for phytoliths, which are silica parts of plants, or pollen grains, or starch residues. And I don't know of any work that's been done for the mission period on that kind of analysis, although it is like on my list of things to get to with the right kind of funding and a lab to do it in, or have somebody do it in. But it does work for other time periods here in the same area. So earlier, older time periods, we have been successful in extracting starch grains from the working edges of tools. So that is a possibility, but at this time we don't have evidence for that kind of food being eaten. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have one more before you start. Caroline just asked, peaches don't grow in this area. Was it a native species different from the peach that we are familiar with now, or is it?
So peaches are not native to this area. They were brought in by the Spanish, and they were grown here, and they actually used to do really well. So we do have evidence of that. We have peach pits from San Luis here in Tallahassee. There are some from St. Augustine and a couple of other sites from the same time period. So they were something that that were eaten and grown. Now, were there vast orchards of peaches like there are in parts of Georgia? Very unlikely. These are probably, you know, things that were planted, and then when they were successful, everybody was really excited because peaches are delicious. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm gonna go. Okay, so zooarchaeology, which is my area of specialty, is the study of animal remains from archaeological sites. And most people think I just look at animal bones, but I also look at teeth and shells, a lot of shells in some of my work, antlers and horns. There's also, sometimes you get lucky and you get fish scales preserved or eggshells. So the great thing to me about zooarchaeology is that for the most part, people are eating the meat, right, off of the animals or the fat or organs or what have you, but there's really hard durable parts that get left behind, so we can actually identify these animals and then often identify how they may have been butchered or how they were cooked, if they were roasted or salted, if their bones were broken open for marrow extraction, or broken even smaller to extract grease out of them, because fat and oils are always something that people are interested in having. So, so that's the area that I work in, and I would, in this part of the world, especially in Tallahassee, the soils are not really conducive to preserving animal remains, bones, teeth, etc. Although we do have some from many of the sites here. We also sometimes get eggshells, which we're in the process of trying to get those identified, because it'd be great to know if they're chicken eggs or turkey eggs or duck eggs or something else. But we do have some evidence for chicken raising based on the presence of gastroliths, or the little, you know, like hard things that chickens swallow to help digest food in their gizzard. And we have some from San Luis. When we excavated in 2018, we found quite a few. These can range from little pieces of glass to little pieces of ceramic sherds to little rocks that are found in that area. Other evidence that we are looking at in Foodways archaeology are ceramics, because people use ceramics. They made them to store foods and process them and cook them, serve them. So here on the screen, you have a picture on the left of an indigenous storage pot, nice and big and round, would be covered with another pot or piece of cloth or a plant leaf or something. And then on the right, you have Spanish storage jars. They're called olive jars. And you see them here kind of lined up. They change in form over time. And those were used to ship things from Spain and other parts of the Spanish Atlantic Empire into the Spanish colonies. So olive jars would have held anything from olive oil and olives, hence the name, but also vinegars and wine, cheeses, chickpeas, other things that could be processed and preserved and stored in olive jars and shipped. And we have lots of pieces of olive jars from Mission Period sites here in the Red Hills. And that's actually one of the markers of having a Mission Period site, because you only get olive jar on sites of this particular time period. Other types of pottery specific to foodways that we find in the Spanish Colonial Period are types of cookware. You may have bowls that were used for making stews or soups, or even maybe frying things in. At San Luis, we have some really interesting, unique forms of skillets that we have not found anywhere else. What's so interesting about them is that they are ceramic skillets, and they were made by native potters because they're made in the native style, but in a Spanish form. There are different shapes of or forms of cookware. Some are very large for preparing hominy and cooking like big one-pot meals. Others are small for maybe frying things in or reheating foods. It seems overall that in Appalachia province during this time, you have some imported cookware, but for the most part, you have indigenous cooks using the cookware that they learned to cook with, and that is easily replaced by local native potters in the area. So that has a lot to do with how you cook certain types of foods and the types of foods you cook, which is interesting. At San Luis, we seem to have the most variety of cookwares, both indigenous and Spanish. But at other outlying mission sites, it's the opposite. It's basically native cookware, native storage vessels, native serving vessels, because it was very likely indigenous women who were doing the cooking for the Spanish friar, and either preferred or had no choice but to use their own traditional wares. Indigenous serving ware, we have bowls, we have plates. One thing we've noticed is that you have these indigenous wares where you have incised designs on them, and they're really specific to this kind of area. But through time, they come to take on other forms that are more Spanish inspired. So of course, the Spanish have majolicas, which are these tin enamel glazed ceramics that are being imported. They're plates, they're bowls, they're painted, they have beautiful decorations on them, but they break and can't cook in them. And once they've broken, there's not a lot you can do to recycle them or reuse them, so they tend to get discarded, but you still have a need for servingware, right? Things to eat out of. And so native potters are making these more in the style of Spanish dishes. And what's interesting is that the Appalachee servingware tends to be more for communal eating, and the Spanish servingware is more for individual eating. So actually sitting at a table by yourself or with a few people, and everyone having their own individual dish to eat out of. So that's something that we've noticed at these sites. Other types of artifacts that go along with Foodways archaeology are things like knives. And I would point out that many of these that you see here are not arrowheads. They're actually knives that would be hafted onto a handle, as the drawing indicates, used for cutting and scraping and all manner of processing food stuff. So we do find these at archaeological sites. My favorite are the Appalachee clay balls up on the top that are unique to this area, and are made in, you can see the design on them, you can see the grooves, right, on those. That's called a paddle stamping design. So a wooden paddle was carved with a design and stamped onto the wet clay before it was hardened and then fired. These are thought to be used in place of having to have super hot fires underneath your pot to make your stew boil. You would instead take these clay balls, put them in the fire till they got extremely hot, which they could withstand because they're ceramics, and then putting them into the pot of liquid. In other places, they call it hot rock cooking or the stone boiling technique. But here in the Red Hills area, we don't have stones great for this kind of work, so the clay balls do the job instead. And again, they are known almost uniquely from this area for this time period. And there are some from San Luis. I think these two pictured here. Those are the ones from San Luis, or there were some found on the campus of FSU back in the 50s. Might be those. So they're pretty cool. And then this shell hoe was found at Mission San Luis, and evidence for farming activities. And then of course it's a really large concher whelk shell from the Gulf. So this, we talked about features. I mentioned features, right, as areas of activity. And this is a picture from San Luis where they've reconstructed a roasting rack. They call it a barbacoa or barbecue. You can see from this picture that much of this structure, or all of this structure, is organic and not durable. It won't survive. In the archaeological record, if it were just left as is, it's probably the kind of thing that is used, maybe repaired for multiple uses, but also probably dismantled at some time. So what would be left? Well, you may have this burned area that gets left. There may be some rocks left, just little hints of what was once there. And so it's my job and other archaeologists' job to try to see that in the ground. And I'll show you some pictures of similar things in a minute. So that's one way to cook food. Another way is to cook over an outdoor open fire. And this is also from Mission San Luis. And you can see they have this outdoor fire area with pots, not in the fire necessarily, but on slabs that would be hot and cooking the meats that are in it. So here's the pot with oil, cooking the meat next to the fire. It's not easy like we have it today, right? Where you can just microwave things or use your air fryer and set it and forget it. Cooking was a full-time job at that point. Okay, we also have possibly hearths, or this picture is actually from my excavations in 2018 at Mission San Luis. We excavated in the Spanish Village area, which the excavations were literally behind the reconstructed Spanish house. And we located another structure that is likely a Spanish style construction house. And in the floor of this house, we have this circular heated clay area that you can see in the picture. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about a feature, in that we have this red clay heated area, these burned sediments above it. And I think this is just my conjecture tonight because I was thinking about this today and what it might be, because a hearth doesn't seem quite right, but it could be something similar to this. This is the reconstructed stove and oven in the friary at San Luis, and it could be that we're looking at where the fire goes in a similar type structure in the Spanish house. I don't know. Don't quote me on it. It is really just my ideas for tonight. Another thing that we get really excited about are trash pits, and these are images of trash pits excavated at Mission San Luis. So you can see this map over here is a 3D kind of model of it, or 2D model of it. You can see the depth, the expanse of it. These things are massive, like 6 meters by 8 meters. That's like 13 feet by 21 or 22 feet. Big, sometimes 6 feet deep. What's really interesting about these trash pits is that there are numerous of them across the site, often associated with houses or house areas, house blocks. And they weren't necessarily dug as trash pits. They were dug originally to mine the clay to then be used in other things, maybe for pottery, maybe for building construction, maybe for floors in the council house or the church. And that then they are backfilled with trash because who wants to have these really massive gaping holes across, the town? People fall in them, kids fall in them, animals fall in them. They're a danger. So they get filled pretty quickly with trash. Also in 2018, we excavated part of one of these trash pits. It was also a clay quarry area that was then backfilled with trash. And here you can see two of my students excavating. They're not very deep yet. This thing goes over 6 feet deep, but you can see the top, the very dark organic sediments that are from the organically enriched soils because of the decomposed food waste here in this area. And it was just a massive undertaking, and a lot of artifacts come from those areas, especially those that are applicable to Foodways. So you can see here a picture of our screen with lots of ceramic pieces. There's a rib bone right here. We also had this animal mandible, which came from that trash pit, and other things from, some of that was previously excavated in that area, and it's just chock full of Foodways data, which is pretty cool. At the museum at San Luis, they've recreated one of these trash pits, if you have a chance to go there when they've reopened. And you can see in this profile, right, looking at it as if we were down in the ground looking at the side of it, different dumping episodes, right, that you can see that in the different colors of soils. Some of those are ash layers from where cooking fires or hearths have been cleaned out and dumped. And that's the kind of stuff that I like. I think it's just so interesting to look at how people were were feeding their families and dealing with cooking and leftovers and dishes and burned food and spoiled food and the daily lives that we all have to experience, and how did they experience it in the past.
Okay, I'm gonna stop you again. Sorry.
That's okay. I was looking at the time and I was like, oh, it's getting kind of late, so I just wanted to get through my slides, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Do you know if any ovens or ornos have been found?
No. Like a big bread oven or something. No, I mean, the one in the friary that is reconstructed is based on the archaeology of that specific area. And I will have to go back after thinking about this today and look at the excavation maps and the pictures and all of the excavation documents to see what their features look like that they base that off of, because I'm not 100% sure. But my feeling is that a lot of cooking took place outside for a number of reasons. One, it's hot in Florida, and you might do some minimal stuff in the wintertime in the house, but most of it's going to take place outside. Also, you don't want to burn down your house if your house is made of flammable materials, and so cooking tends to take place outside. There may also be kind of communal kitchens that are shared within families or across families of multiple houses, so that not, everyone doesn't have to have a kitchen.
Right. Okay, thank you, go.
Yeah. So something that people have probably heard about in Spanish Florida is cattle ranching, and that's not something that's easy to have a lot of physical evidence for, other than maybe the presence of cow remains, which I'll mention here in a minute. But cattle ranching as a tradition was brought to La Florida from Andalusia, which there's a lot of the Spaniards came from that area and immigrated into La Florida through St. Augustine. So we know in La Florida by 1700, there were 34 cattle ranches in this area. Not just, many of them were in Appalachia, but not all of them. There's a lot towards St. Augustine. And there was at least 20,000 head of cattle that were being raised on these 34 cattle ranches. And I show a picture here of some of the Spanish brands that were used to denote ownership of certain cattle. They were not using fences at the time. The cattle were free to roam wherever they went. There are complaints in the historic documents made by Franciscan friars on behalf of the Appalachia, complaining that the cattle are getting out into the Appalachia's fields and ruining their crops. So there's a lot going on at that time. So physical evidence, besides documentary evidence of cattle ranches having taken place, people complaining about cows, is looking at these animal remains from different sites in the La Florida area. And what's interesting is that if you look at the Wally sites, which are up there on the Georgia and the Carolina coast, for the most part, people there were eating, in terms of meat, chickens. They actually ate the most chickens at the Wally sites, which is similar to St. Augustine. In terms of urban St. Augustine sites, they had a very low consumption of beef, but a high consumption of pigs, which pigs were also raised in the Appalachia province. A lot of food was grown in Appalachia province and then used to supply St. Augustine. It was the breadbasket of the mission system and Spain's colony here. At San Luis, right, and this is not necessarily true for any of the other sites in Appalachia province, but at San Luis, the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of beef being eaten, more so than any other site. So this is in relative comparison to other sites of this time period in this area. It's not to say they weren't eating other things, but they ate a lot of beef, which would make sense because they're in the middle of ranch country. The last kind of piece of evidence that I want to mention tonight are something that's new to me and looking at, because I usually work in time periods where we don't have a lot of written records that help us think about what may have been going on at that time. But looking at faith, religious faith, and how it impacts people's ideas about food behaviors. So in this quote from John Worth, who is a historical archaeologist at the University of West Florida, and he has done extensive translations of Spanish documents and hopefully, you know, he's very generous in sharing his translations, and I hope that he will someday have time to write them all up and publish them so we all have better access to them. But basically, Spanish Catholics were expected to follow the food behaviors of the Catholic Church, no questions asked. That would have translated into the Catholic converts in La Florida as well. So, and I don't expect you all to read this. I put all this information up here because there were a lot of rules about what you could and could not eat and when you could and could not eat it. And it wasn't all about just fasting or abstaining from meat, right? Things were mixed in. You could abstain from meat on some days. Other times you had to fast every day of the week. There were ways around it. So Spanish Catholics did not eat land animals when they were abstaining from meat, which include cows, pigs, chickens, goats, and sheep, or birds during the days when that was practiced. But you could eat fish and shellfish and other aquatic animals on abstinence days. So things that we might be considered meat, we might consider to be meat, they did not. Things like gelatin or butter, cheese, and eggs could be consumed because they were thought to not have a meaty taste. And depending on the extent to which an individual was devout and followed the Catholic doctrine, they might also eat soups or gravies, stews, and broths made from chicken or beef because it was transformed, right? It wasn't actual meat, it was a broth. And these are things that we've been learning from these translations that John Worth has been making, which to me is so interesting and really just makes everything more complex on my end as an archaeologist, but I also find it extremely interesting. Something else I've been looking into, particularly since teaching this class on Foodways archaeology during this time period, is historic cookbooks. And there are a couple from this time period. The most famous is the Nuevo Arte de Cocina by Altamirus, translated by John Worth. There's also another translation by Vicky Hayward, but she brings her own experiences into it, and so it's less of a straightforward translation, and it's more of her translation and her interpretations. And from a researcher standpoint, I need straight translation. So I look at John's, but the interesting thing about the Altamira cookbook is that he was a Franciscan friar, and the Franciscans were the ones that came to missionize the Indians during the 1600s here in La Florida. So they may have been making the same or expected to have the same types of foods made for them, right? They relied on local cooks. They may have taught them how to make these foods and then expected that those meals to be made. What's interesting about Altamira's cookbook is that in his cookbook, he combines both old world ingredients that he would have access to in Spain, but also new world ingredients. And he wrote this when he was in Spain. And one of the, I actually took this recipe from another cookbook, but it's similar time period, and there are some similar recipes in Altamiras's book for roast turkey Spanish style. Turkeys are a New World animal, right? They are native to the Americas. But they were taken to Spain and other areas and became very popular on menus at that time. And so this is the recipe right there on the screen. It's not very involved. It's not really specific. And, but you get the point, right? Like the idea is to clean it, skewer it, keep it moist, don't spoil the taste, cook it for the right amount of time, and there you go. It's pretty simple. So I realize this is pretty, a pretty big overview, right, of all the things that we could know about Foodways archaeology and the types of evidence that we use. But what we're finding to date is that in the mid to late 1600s, when these missions are at their peak, right, in the mid 1600s to 1704, we have very little data from Appalachia specific or Appalachia only areas at mission sites. They're just not a lot of information from those areas, and a lot of it has to do with preservation of those areas. The soil is not conducive to preserving bones and other things. But San Luis is a great place to look because there was a high population there of Spaniards and Appalachians and probably other indigenous peoples that moved into the area. Much of the work at San Luis has been done in areas where Foodways remains are expected to be found, like the village, the Spanish Village area, and also around the fort. And we know that that the Spaniards imported things like cattle ranching and they tried to grow wheat, and it was marginally successful. You know, they imported some foods, but the shipments of those foods were not reliable, and often by the time they got here, they had spoiled. So they had to learn to incorporate native plants and animals into the diet. So we really see a blended foodways happening at places like Mission San Luis, which is at the heart of my research, and I'm still working on, you know, looking at all of the data from our 2018 excavations, because we were there for 16 weeks and we generated a lot of data. So yeah, it's a very exciting time period to work in. I love having these multiple lines of evidence, because it's not something you get in all places and all times. And I thank everyone for your attention, and stay tuned as we refine, you know, our data collection and our data analysis. We'll have hopefully more of the story to tell in a few years. So thanks everyone tonight, and I'm very happy to take questions from you.
Wait for them to start popping in. I'll go ahead and start, because Nancy's got one already. Oh, great presentation. Thank you. Will you talk a little bit about your work at Mission San Luis, and have you done all the excavations that you're going to be doing, or do you have future ones planned, or is there really not any more work to be done there?
There's always more work to be done at any site, it seems like. So I will not be working again at San Luis anytime soon. Hopefully in the future, yes, because with any kind of project, you answer your questions, or you gather the data to answer your questions, and while you're out in the field, you have a lot more questions. So I would like to go back, but currently I have another project at another possible mission site in the Tallahassee area, and I can't say a whole lot about it because it's on private land, and so I also have a grant through the National Park Service, and I'm bound by the restrictions of my grant to not talk about exactly where it's at, but it is another mission site. We think we know which one, and it's never been excavated professionally. And so in addition to identifying the site and determining exactly which mission it was, and some of the things that happened there, I'll also, of course, be looking at Foodways data from that site as well. Because when I excavate specifically with looking for foodways, looking for small plants and animals and other types of evidence, the methods I use are pretty specific. And so we do get a lot of stuff, right? We have lots of artifacts and soil sediments and that type of thing that maybe weren't being collected in the 80s at some of these other mission sites that were excavated then, because that was not the focus of their research questions, right? They were being driven by what site is this? What's the architectural layout? Where are the structures? That kind of thing, which is important work. It's great to have as a foundation, and is something that we certainly will do at this next site. But I'm going to go beyond that, because Foodways is the area that I'm most interested in. Thank you for the question.
Sure. Okay, Ben would like to know: is there evidence of African foodways in Appalachia? Or in the Appalachia province?
None that I've seen, and I will say that it is very difficult to assign ethnicity to a foodway just based on food remains. So it's a great question. It is something I've wondered about, because there are Africans in St. Augustine at this time. There's communities of them that are well known, and so it would be interesting to know if they are living here in probably San Luis for the most part, because it's such a big community, but we don't know that for sure. And I think it's definitely an avenue for further inquiry.
Okay. Kay would like to know, were there native plums? I'm not sure if she's asking if plums were native to Florida or if...
I don't think they're native to Florida, and I don't know if something that would be similarly equivalent. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a plant person, so I do my best. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Since the fort at San Luis and Mexican soldiers, were Mexican artifacts found there? Is there any evidence that the friars made sacramental wine from the local muscadine grapes, or did they get enough wine from Spain?
Oh, those are a lot of good questions.
Yes.
I really can't speak to the specifics of the fort at San Luis because that I'm not an expert there. But if you ever get to go on the tours, or I think they have virtual talks too by Jerry Lee, he's the senior archaeologist out there. He would be a good person to ask about that because he knows that place like the back of his hand. He is just a font of knowledge on San Luis and the artifacts and where they were found and whatnot. The other question about the wine. So it's my understanding that they imported the wine. It had to be a certain kind. And the Spaniards were well known, and it's in the documents that they thought very highly of their native foodways, and they wanted to replicate or keep to them as much as possible. So it's my understanding that they were not trying to make wine out of muscadine grapes, that they needed to import wine for the sacrament. And then of course there were issues with that when you couldn't get the imports. Same with wheat for the host. That was their preference, was to have wheat made into the communion host. When that was not possible, they would use maize, but they didn't like it, and they were not shy about saying so in documents.
Can't imagine they would be.
Definitely different texture.
Phyllis suggests cocoa plums.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I'd have to look into it. It's really outside of my scope.
Yeah, plums aren't my thing either. So.
You could ask me about turkeys or something. I could give you more.
Okay, we got any more questions? Popping up. Not yet. You guys are quiet again tonight. Oh. Did they eat alligators?
Maybe. I don't have any evidence for it here. I mean, we see it in some of the Lemoyne drawings, which have their own issues, and maybe in other places, but I've never seen evidence of alligator from this area. Doesn't mean they weren't here, and doesn't mean they didn't eat them, just we don't have the evidence. Cool. Just want to see if
anything
there were...
else? I saw your photo of turtles, so we know they were eating tortoises.
A lot of turtles. Make good turtle soup, although I've never had it. Turkey and deer are pretty ubiquitous. Those are things that everybody in the Southeast is eating at that time.
Daphne says thank you.
Oh, thank you all. I appreciate it. It's so weird not to see all of you.
I know. A little bit different in webinar. We're not able to see all the attendees, but.
Well, I hope that everyone enjoyed it, and you have my email. It's on the screen, so always feel free to email me if you have any other questions that you think of.
Oh, Harley would like to know, have you ever thought about trying to do experimental archaeology with the foodways?
How so? Ask Harley. This is my student.
Okay. How so, Harley?
They do experimental archaeology with foodways out at San Luis. If you've any of you have ever been to San Luis when it's open and they're doing the living history activities, they do a lot of experimental stuff, and the staff out there are amazing. They really do their research. I know I showed pictures from some of their events in my PowerPoint tonight because they do such a good job of it. So in terms of other types of experimental archaeology, when I teach my Foodways archaeology class, I have all the students cook Spanish recipes from this time period. and they have to bring them in. They have to do videos of the cooking and bring them in, and we talk about it and share. It's pretty interesting.
That's what she suggests.
Yeah, I would love to do. I would love to do more of that, but you know, I don't think FSU is going to let me set up a barbacoa in the middle of Landis Green.
We might have to do that this year for Fall Farm Day.
There you go.
At the museum. If we're the only ones open, we might have to try it. So
cool. Let me know. I'd love to help out.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing anything else. Ben says thank you and delicious.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm gonna post up. Oh, you're welcome, Daphne. We love you.
Sounds like a repeat customer.
Yes.
Well, this has been so much fun. Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it. And you know, clearly I love to talk about food.
Well, anytime. We greatly appreciate your being here. Like I said, I had so many comments from your students about you, and I was excited to get to talk to you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, and I just want to thank all of you for attending tonight. We are so grateful for your continued support. For those of you who have attended previously and had questions about the phytonutrients color chart, I'm still working on getting that from our nutrition lecture from 2 weeks ago, and I promise I will keep working on it. So reach out to me, and I will have that color chart as soon as possible. 2 weeks from now, on the 24th, our lecture, we're going to be switching to GoToWebinar instead of Zoom. I promise it looks exactly the same type of registration, same everything. But you might notice just a few little bit of differences in overall appearance. Other than that, it has a chat room, it has the Q&A, it has everything just the same. So I'm hoping you don't notice a very big difference. But other than that, next week we will be here again on September 17th with Dr. Josh Goodman from the State Archives of Florida. I think all of you know Josh. We love having Josh come out and talk. He's going to be talking about Florida and the 19th Amendment, of course, women's rights and the right to vote. So we would love to see you out here again. And I think we'll be having a guest host. I'll be on vacation. So if she's able to handle it, she will be sitting in for me. If she's not, I will be on remote on my vacation talking to you from there. So we'll see what she's able to accomplish and if she can handle it on her own. But otherwise, I'll speak to you from Destin. And we'll see you all next week. So have a great one, and be careful, be safe out there, and stay healthy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.